Arbeitslose sind in mir, nicht gehört Chadosh im Land. In Fabrik dem Hammerklang, es liegen Keilem kalt vergessen. So nimmt der Javer, sie schön fressen, gehen mir herum in Gas. Wie die Gewehr im Pust und Pass, wie die Gewehr im Pust und Pass. 1, 2, 3, 4 Arbeitslose sind in mir. Ohne Begit, ohne Heim, unser Bett ist Erdenlein. Und noch wer was zu genießen, teilt mit sich mit jedem Bissen. Wasser wie die Gewehr im Wein, gießen mir in sich herein, gießen mir in sich herein. Oi, 1, 2, 3, 4 Arbeitslose sind in mir. Jahrelang gearbeitet schwer und geschafft als mehr und mehr. Eiser, Schlösser, Städten, Länder, vor a Heifele Verschwender. Unser Leun, der Fahr ist wuss, Hunger, Neut und arbeitslos. Hunger, Neut und arbeitslos. Marschieren mir, Arbeitslose tritt noch tritt, und wir singen sich ein Lied für ein Land, a Welt a neue, wo es leben Menschen freie, Arbeitslose, es kein schon Hand, in dem neuen freien Land, in dem neuen freien Land, in dem neuen freien Land, in dem neuen freien Land.
Shalom Aleichem, Dobry V'yachor, Kiara Kotev, and welcome to the launch of thesongremains.org, a collection of poems in Yiddish with English translation. I'm Dave Moskovitz, your MC for today, and the webmaster of the site. Over the course of the next 80 minutes or so, we'll hear some poetry readings from the collection, as well as 2 of the poems set to music. We'll also hear from some speakers talking about the significance of the collection, this website, and what the poems can tell us about the poets, and the historical context that the poems were written in. These poems were originally written in Yiddish and collected by Bynum Heller in 1951 in Warsaw as Das Lied is geblieben. All the poets in the collection lived in Poland during the Nazi German occupation and were killed during the Second World War. You can learn more about Bynum Heller and the 36 poets on our site. The song you just heard, Der Arbeitslose Marsch, or the March of the Unemployed, was performed by Daniel Kahn, who has a wonderful alternative and much more liberal translation in a version which you can also find on our site. The original poem was written by Mordechai Gibertig, who lived in Krakow and wrote many poems and songs there, many of which appear in this collection. He was shot and killed by the Nazis in the Krakow ghetto in the infamous Bloody Thursday of 4 June 1942. Gibertig is one of the most well-known Yiddish poets who also wrote Es brennt, Our Town is Burning, one of the iconic poems and songs of the Holocaust. Today, we are launching the site with 8 poems that you will hear in this webinar. There are over 160 poems in the collection by 36 authors. We'll be publishing one of these poems every week for the next 3 and a bit years. You can subscribe on thesongremains.org to receive these poems by email as they are published. We encourage you to do so. It's free, and it's free of advertising or other marketing. The English translations were all written by Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz, who happens to be my mother, who will now tell you about herself and how this project began.
Shalom Aleichem. I'm Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz, the translator of this collection of poems, Das Lied is geblieben, or The Song Remains. My parents were born in Poland in the late 19th century and emigrated to the United States before the First World War. My father, Yitzhak Traister, was a Yiddish teacher, principal of Yiddish Workmens circle schools, and instilled in me a deep love for the Yiddish language. I was born in 1927, which makes me nearly 97 years old today. I didn't speak English until I went to school in Springfield, Massachusetts at the age of 5. I completed a PhD in educational psychology at Yeshiva University and became a professor at Cal State University, Northridge. After I retired in the 1980s, I wrote a book called Love Despite Hate, which was published by Shotgun, about the post-war lives of child survivors of the Holocaust, from which a number of child survivor support groups sprang up around the world. As my interests turned more toward the Yiddish language, which becomes more endangered every year as the last generation of native speakers like me die out, I found that the Ringelblum archive that had been buried under the Warsaw Ghetto contained a large number of poems by obscure authors documenting the lives of the final generation of Polish Jews as they faced liquidation by the Germans in World War II. I published these poems on the website called Poetry in Hell. About 15 years ago, I rediscovered a book on my shelf that my father had given me. Das Lied ist geblieben, an anthology of poems in Yiddish by authors who were murdered during the Nazi occupation of Poland, collected by Behnam Heller and published in Warsaw in 1951 by the then communist government. There are not many copies of this book left, mostly in dusty archives, in research library basements. Until now, these poems have not been available online, and only a few of them have been translated into English. I have been working hard translating these poems over the last few years, and we are making them available online to anyone who is interested on our website called thesongremains.org. There are 36 authors in the collection and over 160 poems, and the text of all of the poems in both Yiddish and English is searchable and discoverable. They cover the complete range of Jewish life in Poland, with poems about the lighthearted love of nature to the trials of coming of age in the ghetto, and of course, trying to come to terms with hatred, destruction of Jews, and death. Given the context of the time and place in which these poems were written in Poland through 1939 to 1945, some of the poems celebrate communism as the savior from the twin evils of capitalism and fascism. These poems are both a celebration of a cultural milieu that has been utterly destroyed, as well as a timely reminder for us in the 21st century in the so-called free world. I hope that this collection will be a lasting legacy for the language that I love so much, and a tribute to the poets and unique culture that were so brutally destroyed by the Nazis. We can all be proud and strengthened by the writers in this book of poems who found their own strength and courage in the ruins of the Polish ghettos where they were imprisoned, kept sick and hungry by the Nazis, and yet, despite everything, they were still able to create beautiful, creative, meaningful, and honest poetry. We will be publishing one poem per week on the songremains.org website. You can subscribe to updates on the site. I hope you find meaning and some joy in the collection, certainly pride in the poets who, under terrible circumstances, pursued their love of poetry.
Thanks, Mom. That was really beautiful. There are a wide variety of poets in this collection from many walks of life. One of the poets, Yud Lamed Kohn, was a relatively unknown metalworker from Warsaw. He was a Bundist who wrote children's poetry, but also wrote some serious works. His poem, Mein Weg durch Leben, My Way Through Life, tells of the constant struggle of injustice, suffering, hunger, and unemployment. But he is still optimistic and hopeful. Sadly, he was shot and killed in Russia in 1941. And Sarah will now read for us this poem in both Yiddish and English.
Mein Weg durch ein Leben von Yud Lamed Kohn. Mein Weg durch ein Leben war Querschnitt durch Leiden, durch Jahre von Unrecht und bitteren Zorn. Ich bin da durchgegangen mit meinem jungen Leben, durch Magetes und durch Hungerjahre. Heint zieht mein Weg sich durch Jahren ohne Arbeit, durch Tag, was zerschlagen, zerbrechen, zerreiben. Noch gib sich nicht unter, ich brech sich nicht ein, und ganz wie ich bin, ich will verbleiben. Und ich weiß, als nicht einmal wird's Leben nachhabt worden, farben Hals mich mit Nägel und Werken, nur nein, ich hoffe, als ich will jeden Nissien zerbrechen. Ich hoffe, als als Ding will ich beistehen. My way through life. My way through life was through years of injustice and bitter suffering and anger. In my young life, I struggled through years of epidemics and hunger. Today, my way is through unemployment, days of disappointment, rough, bad times, but I don't give up. I'm unbroken and hold myself together. I will remain. And I know that life can sometimes take you with its nails at your throat and choke you. I hope to break through each and every time, and I hope that I can help you.
Thanks again, Mom. It was really beautiful. And I love the message of hope at the end. even despite all of the terrible things that are happening around you. Now, Ashkenazi Jews like me have a long history in Poland, sometimes troubled, sometimes beautiful. It's true that more Jews died in Poland during the Holocaust than any other country, but it's also true that Poland was the main center of Jewish culture and the Yiddish language for centuries. In fact, in the 18th century, Poland was home to over 70% of the world's total Jewish population, and Jews there enjoyed far more freedom and autonomy than most other European countries. Poland was the birthplace of Hasidism as well as the birthplace of the Jewish Enlightenment. And in this collection, you'll hear cities like Lodz, Krakow, Warsaw, and others mentioned in these poems. I would now like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Grzegorz Kowal, the Ambassador of the Polish Republic to New Zealand, to speak. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Dave. First of all, I would like to acknowledge your work, your mother's work, and all the participants who decided to run this project. I believe it's a very necessary idea to deliver the story, the rich story of the Hasidism, Jewish language, Yiddish language in Europe. As I'm an ambassador of Poland, I will give you remarks on my perspective of the Yiddish language and how it developed in Poland. Through the centuries, Poland has been populated, as you know, by diverse ethnic and linguistic groups, all of which have left their mark. One of the most distinguished was a community of Polish Jews. In fact, as much as Yiddish, as you could hear already, emerged as a language heavily influenced by Roman languages, it has been a basic communication means in a pre-war Poland for a Jewish community living here for hundreds of years. A 1931 census established that almost 80% of the 3.25 million Jews in Poland spoke native Yiddish, which gives almost 2.5 million Yiddish speakers before the war. In fact, in the 19th century, the land of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was, let's say, Poland back then, became a birthday place of modern Yiddish literature. The impressive Yiddish literature movement reached its apex in interwar Poland, when Warsaw became the most important Jewish culture center in the world. At that point, as I've said, around 80% of the Polish Jews spoke and read in English. Jewish cultural life in Warsaw was booming. There was Yiddish press, dailies like Der Moment, magazines like Literarische Blätter or Globus, bookstores, theaters, avant-garde literature, and as well as the booming film industry. The most important film, or the most well-known back then, was a movie called The Book, one of the masterpieces of the Polish Jewish cinema. As far as I'm also aware, Isaac Bashevis Singer, of whom you all know, who lived in Warsaw, was the only Nobel Prize winner who actually wrote his book in Yiddish, and it was then later translated into English. And what's more important and stunning, that he delivered his speech at the dinner's award ceremony in Yiddish. As an interesting fact, I can also add that so-called Yiddish land, which was, as I said, Poland, nowadays Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, can also be considered the birthplace of the modern Hebrew literature, as the earlier speakers of the modern Hebrew often had Yiddish as their native language. Truism is to say, it's not only a simple mean of communication, but it's a vessel of heritage, tradition, and history, and it emanates itself in the most beautiful way as a poetry, which we acknowledge today. Unfortunately, it was all ceased to exist when German Nazis occupied Poland and introduced the institutional how do you say it, scheme of Holocaust. As Poles and Jews have 1,000 years of a common history, both languages, Polish and Jewish, have many commonalities. In fact, there were writers like Itzhok Leibusz Perec, whose work was so much dependent on the Polish idiom. Based in Warsaw and considered the father of the modern Yiddish literature, Perec was very much relying on a Polonism in his styles, and his readers who were unfamiliar with the Polish language have always had a hard way understanding some of the linguistic peculiarities in his work. It's also interesting fact that the register of Yiddish have a highest number of Slavic loan words was the spoken colloquial English. The Polish or Slavic element also came to the fore in the language of the past, poetry, and folk songs. There are many Slavic loan words usually appear with the connection of the household, items, and activities immediately surrounding the family and professional life. Me, myself, speaking German and Polish, it was quite good to hear the Yiddish poetry in its native language, because in fact I could understand almost 90% of it. But there are few words, or there is many words, I will say only a few, who are exactly the same as in Yiddish as in Polish, which is gąbę, gląb, dąb, drąg, a pole, wące, wąsy, ustaż, wędkę, wędka, fishing rod, paręcz, poręcz, railing, pęten, pętać, pręt, pręt, rod, rond, rząd, or row. So as you could see, well, there are hundreds of words like that. But it also goes another way around. Centuries of coexistence with Yiddish did mark Polish language, probably more so than any other languages. So there is many Yiddish loanwords in Polish. For instance, rejwach, kapcan, mecyje, ślamazara. As you could see, that it was very deep language interconnection and a culture interconnection between the Polish and the back then Yiddish culture, and they transfer into deep spiritual understanding of each other. As you have mentioned, Dave, the Poland was also birthplace of the Hasids movement, very spiritual movement, which again in the 18th and 19th century heavily impacted our Romance movement and also the understanding of the spirituality by the Polish Catholics, Orthodox, and many other religions. And all of that interaction transferred into great appreciations of each other cultures. And I believe, I'm pretty sure of that those cultures, by the history, but also by the feeling, are binded together. So thank you again for this very necessary initiative, and I'm looking forward to reading every poem for the next 3 years, once a week. Thank you.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much, Ambassador. Really appreciate those words and underscoring the deep ties between Poland and the Jewish people. Now, let's see. We will move on to talking about how this collection was collected. Assembling a collection like this is really a gargantuan effort. Sarah has been working from a tattered paperback copy of the original book, which I scanned by hand and was then sent through the Yiddish Book Center's optical character recognition software to produce the text that you'll see on the website. The OCR algorithms are good, but they're not perfect, maybe 98% accurate. That means that they need to be proofread. I'd like to introduce to you today one of my personal heroes, and that is Sarah's brother, Leon, or as we call him, Uncle Label. Label introduced me to the world of computers when I was very young. And now, even at age 84, he hasn't stopped working in his professional career as a data scientist for Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco, where his algorithmic magic saves lives every day. Label has been working in his spare time on proofreading the OCR text, which is a really exacting task, but a wonderful way of engaging with the poems themselves. And by the way, we're looking for additional proofreaders who read Yiddish, as well as people to record readings of the poems on the website in Yiddish and English. So if you'd like to help out and give Label a break, please get in touch by clicking on Contact Us on the website. Now, I've asked Label to choose a poem to read for us in Yiddish and English, and he's chosen The Middle of the Way by Hindenheim. Over to you, Label.
Thank you, David. Inmitten Weg, Hindenheim. Von meiner Hall rinnt der Regen, meine Backen seien nass. Ich komm euch schwellen Mocheke als Gast und schweig von Wannen und zu wemmen. A Vogel zittert auf a Zweig, ist zum Abfliehen schon greit. Wer wird früher der Jürgen mir? Der Vogel zieht die Sellner Schich. Da hat der goldene Chrysantem abgeblüht und da auf Wegen liegen Blätter. Und da stehen die Landgitter mit abgehackter Stickelglied. Nur von der Fenster, von der Weiz, fällt ein Licht in meine Augen. Sehe ich, wie der Umwelt geht, gekrönt in der Regenbogen. In the middle of the way, Hindenheim. From my hair, rain is running, my cheeks are wet. I come to muddy thresholds as a guest, am silent about where and to whom. A bird trembles on a twig, ready to fly away. Who will reach me first, the bird or the soldier's shoes? Here a golden plant has finished blooming, and here on the way lie leaves, and here stand Olympic gods with chopped off parts. But from a window from afar falls a light into my eyes. I see how sorrow goes, crowned with a rainbow.
Thank you so much for that, Label. And that was a very well chosen poem. And thanks for reading and for doing all of the proofreading. Just thank you so much. Now, this collection of poems was originally published in book form in 1951 in Warsaw by the Polish government in their press, the Yiddish book. This was a very different Poland from the 1910s when my grandparents emigrated, very different from 1941 during the war, and very different again to the modern day. At the end of the war, Poland was liberated by the Soviet Union and a communist government was installed. A number of poets in this collection had a communist bent, and immediately after the war, it seemed that the utopian future that these poets had dreamed about might yet come to pass. But ultimately, Poles, as well as the remaining Jews and other minorities, were often harshly repressed by their new Soviet masters, and many, like the anthologist Beenham Heller, renounced communism and fled to other countries. Giacomo Lichtner is the Associate Professor of History and Film at Te Henengawaca Victoria University here in Wellington, New Zealand. He is a descendant of Holocaust survivors who fled to Italy after the war. I would like to invite Dr. Lichtner to tell us a bit about the historical context for the publication of these poems. Giacomo.
Thank you, David, and good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. So 1951 was the year in which Polish communist writer and Holocaust survivor Tadeusz Borowski committed suicide by means of gas inhalation. Borowski could seemingly resist the ghosts of Auschwitz, but not the disillusionment of witnessing post-war Poland gradually fall into dictatorship. In 1951, a year before the new Stalinist constitution of Poland was passed, that fall was gaining momentum. Hopes of a Polish road to socialism, as David was saying, had been dashed as early as 1948, when the Polish United Workers' Party had entrenched its hegemony, occupying all spheres of life, leaving only a veneer of pluralism or choice. It is a familiar story of totalitarianism tightening its grip by the gradual but capillary occupation of power, through terror, conformism, opportunism, fanaticism, censorship, indoctrination, and surveillance, enforced or fostered until the system becomes effectively self-sustaining. 1951 for Poland was also a year of rationing and food requisitions. This was the harvest of forced industrialization that had been decreed a year earlier by the Stalinist six-year plan. Its shining light would be the Lenin steel mills in the purpose-built new town of Nowa Huta, which would later be immortalized in Andrzej Wajda's masterpiece, Man of Marble. Full employment and rationing was a very Soviet kind of paradox. While the Stalinist occupation of Poland took root in its socioeconomic life, it ensured its future, or tried to ensure its future, through the control of culture. 1951 was also the year, as these poems were published, it was also the year in which all English university departments were shut down, with the exception of Warsaw universities. Culture was redefined as social realist, which Wajda would later define as life not as it is, but as it ought to be. And as non-conformist orders were ostracized, in 1951 there were effectively three topics that were acceptable subjects: the achievements of socialism, the productivity and self-sacrifice of workers, and the horrors of Nazi occupation. It may be that the publication of this collection in 1951 benefited from the institutional acceptability of voices detailing Nazi oppression. Certainly centralized, heavily controlled, but for a while Yiddish culture had a resurgence in late 40s, early 50s Poland. Zachary Baker calls it a silver age of Yiddish publishing. Even though at the same time in the Soviet Union, Yiddish was being repressed, and even though, as we know, Stalin appropriated Jewish suffering into the grand narrative of the struggle between communism and fascism. In fact, in this period, Soviet Yiddish writers often came to rely on their Polish colleagues to publish their works. So while publishing treatises and reprinting the Yiddish canon and producing memorial literature, beautiful memorial literature steeped in mourning and nostalgia, Yiddish Book Press simultaneously negotiated Soviet influence by also publishing Yiddish translations of Stalin's or Lenin's writings, for instance, as well as major Russian cultural works. At the center of these efforts were men such as David Svard, Bear Mark, Hersch Moller, Leib Litzky, and Binem Heller, who's the curator of this particular anthology, who had survived the war in the USSR, and women like Rachela Auerbach, the lucid chronicler of the Warsaw Ghetto, who continued at Yad Vashem the extraordinary documentation work she had done for Ringelblum's Oyneg Shabbos. As Rachel Grossman has pointed out in a brilliant thesis at Harvard, Yiddish literature in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust was defined by an urge to produce, a feverish oeuvre, partly spurred by fear that the legacy of this culture could be erased or subsumed. The poems we're launching today share in that same tradition, conveying still the same sense of urgency, the same agency, the same sense of belonging, suffused by loss, even despair perhaps, but also stubbornly alive, imaginative, persistent, dignified, and resolute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giacomo. That was the most cogent, articulate, pithy sort of summary that I could have really hoped for, and very educational and provides excellent context for what this collection is all about. Now, amidst all of that, we're going to have a brief musical interlude of the song Bleib gesund in mir Kroke, Farewell My Krakow, written by Mordechai Gebertig and performed by Polish duo Magda Brudzinska and Konrad Lias, recorded in front of Mordechai Gebertig's house in Krakow. And the subtitles are those of Sarah's translation, which you'll also find on the website.
Mir Kroke, Bleibt's mir gesund, zwar die Füge spannt schon hat mein Kopf. Schreibt will das Säune, wem treibt der Hund, Mittag so das mich von dir durch. Bleib gesund, mir klug, ich sag ich, es verkleidet, letzte Mal mit Halsen weißt du mir. Auf mein Mames Käfer hat sich ausgehört, schwer gewähnt, das scheiden sich mit dir. Ausgehört die Augen, bis die letzte Tür, wann mit jedem Tanzen kalten steht, ob dein Seidenskäfer nicht gefunden. Es muss schon zum Kommen seine Matze sein. Bleib gesund, wir klugen. Heilig ist deine Tate, Mama, du bin doch nicht. Neben sei zu liegen, ist mir nicht beschert. Das Vater Käfer ist weit auf mir. Gesund, mir klugen, żegnaj. Krakowie.
It's a beautiful piece. Now, Declan Dunn is the founder of the educational website remember.org, which is dedicated to remembering and preserving Holocaust memories, history, and stories, including photos, art, biographies, and more. And now I have a recorded video clip from Declan, who will tell us how poetry can contribute to our view of history.
How poetry can contribute to our view of history. I'm Declan Dunn, founder of Remember.org, and I'm grateful to be here with the song Remains, sharing this because I was inspired 42 years ago by a poem by Charlotte Delbo, which led me to create Remember.org. In a class where history at the surface was a summary told by the victors, a perception telling what happened, always the what and the facts, debated and refined, often by intellects judging the past. Poetry to me is perspective, showing the human, the individual beneath the experience of history, bringing it beyond facts to connecting us to what actually happened. And as Leonard Cohen once sang, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. To me, poetry is the light that cracks history open and shows the light, the experience, and the humanity of what people went through. Poetry gives us what's beneath the surface of history, a three-dimensional experience instead of trying to narrow it down, like the Yiddish poem, The Ring, written by Miriam Ulanover, one of the only Orthodox poets, female of her time. Parted from this ring I will never choose. My heart could not survive. Tighter, smaller grows my life, and the ring has now grown loose. In words like that, poetry becomes a bridge to that history. Beneath the battles and what we read in history classes is the struggle, the experience, the Yiddish culture, fragile, and in the case of these poems, a statement that I am alive. I was here. Poetry also fills in the gaps because a great poem, when you read it, you want to go deeper. There are gaps in there. What's missing? How can I learn more? Like Alexander Hamel, who shared his poem, I Cannot Forget, which echoes Never Shall I Forget by Elie Wiesel, and is a poem that talks about his experience at Roatan. And what that does is invite the students not to study who was there, what was the battle, who were the generals, but from a people's perspective, a people's history, not a history written to persuade, a history written to be remembered and to be shared. History gives us answers. Poetry keeps us asking questions, going deeper, and remembering. And that urge to go deeper leads us to expressions like you're seeing here, birdsong. This was written by a 6th grader in 1993 with no connection to the Holocaust, but who had studied poetry and art, inspired by a teacher who said, now you show me what you think, what your poetry is. And in birdsong, what she writes is, he doesn't know the world at all, nor what to sing about. I do, but does it matter? I feel trapped here, my love for all things, vanished, trapped beyond reality and a nightmare. I know I'd open my heart to beauty and go into the woods. Someday I hope that one day I will realize how wonderful it is to be alive. In a way, poetry makes us remember. History makes us want to forget. Poetry is the voice of a person, perspective speaking out saying, I am here, remember me. Like these poems written in Yiddish, a language that may seem lost, but in these poems is alive and vibrant and saying, remember. That's what poetry contributes to history.
Thank you, Declan, for that really moving short video. We really, really appreciate it. And it helps understand how poetry can really fill in those missing gaps in our understanding of history and the present. Now, you may be aware that this webinar is coming to you from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a tiny country of 5 million people down under Life der Oilens Tuchus. New Zealand took in Jewish and Polish refugees after the war, although somewhat reluctantly, but that's a different story. We have a Holocaust Center here in Wellington, and here on the webinar today, we have Chief Executive Officer Gillian Wess, who will help us understand what these poems can teach us about the Holocaust. Gillian. You need to unmute yourself, Gillian.
Shalom Aleichem, and a guten Morgen from New Zealand. And what a pleasure it is to be joining you all across the world. Growing up in London as a young Jewish girl of Polish, Lithuanian, and Czech heritage, I was well familiar with hearing the Mama Lorschen, the Yiddish mother tongue. Although not always fluent, the East End English of my grandparents' generation overflowed with Yiddish words and expressions, used as a form of exclamation, high emotion, grief, insult, or humor. To me, the words always held drama. It was a special secret language only spoken by Jews across the dinner table, behind our closed doors, but also outside on the street, in the Jewish shops, wherever and whenever Jews gathered together. Yiddish remains for me as a fond memory of my upbringing, and here in New Zealand, with our small Jewish population, it is sadly not heard or understood nearly enough, if at all. And we all know how important memory is, particularly in the context of the Holocaust. I am proud to be the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand, the National Centre for Holocaust Remembrance and Education. The collection and telling of Holocaust testimonies, the stories of the victims, survivors, refugees, and the next generations from before, during, and since the Holocaust, not only keeps their memories alive, they form a most important, critical, historical resource for our work of Holocaust education. The message to never forget has become more important than ever. A decreasing number of our cherished Holocaust survivors remain. And so we must treasure and preserve their first-hand stories and experiences while we can. Such eyewitness accounts are undeniable and the strongest antidote to the surge of increasing Holocaust denial, distortion, and rising anti-Semitism that we are once again experiencing. And so too, the cultural resistance against the conditions under which these poems in the Song Remains were written bear witness to a remarkable courage and will to live and survive, and to provide testimony for future generations through the power of creative endeavor. We are fortunate and should celebrate that as the testimonies of Holocaust victims remain with us through all forms of their creators' artistic expression and composition, through the written word, visual imagery, storytelling of film and photography, as well as music and song, so many of which are miraculously being recovered and revealed to us, reproduced and performed, so too will this treasury of poetry, and it really is a treasure, as composed in their original Yiddish language, become a highly valuable and cherished record of who and what we lost. Just as their blessed memory, the song remains. And so I congratulate, sending Mazel Tov to everyone involved in this ambitious and impressive project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gillian. Just want to say that we too, despite our tiny size here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have something to contribute as well. And we're very lucky to have the Holocaust Center helping preserve that culture and memory here in Wellington. Now, the Yiddish Workmen's Circle is an organization that is one of the last bastions and guardians of secular Yiddish culture in North America. All four of my grandparents were members and attended the same Arbiter Ring conferences even before my parents met. The Toronto branch is particularly active, and today we are fortunate to have Sandy Feiner from the Toronto Workmen's Circle Foundation read us a poem. Yiddish is Sandy's first language. She was born into a family of Holocaust survivors who were ardent Yiddishists and Bundists and went to Arbiter Ring schools. She's a board member of both the Toronto Arbiter Ring and the Toronto Workmen's Circle Foundation. And she will now read for us Shlomo Berstein's A Cloud via a recording that she made last week.
A Wolken, Shlomo Berstein. So hat Wolken aufgehangen sein Gewehen auf meine Scheuren und mir angetan sein Treuer. Wollt ich a greuer, benediker Wolken gewähnen, wollt mit Zefscher euch meine Tränen da sein. Bin ich nicht kein Wolken, seht keiner nicht mein Pein, und skrächen meine Tränen nicht zu kennen Schulden. A cloud, Shlomo Berstein. A cloud hung his tears on my window and clothed me in his sadness. If I were a small, weeping gray cloud, then someone would see my tears. But I'm not a cloud. No one sees my grief, and my tears have no power to reach anyone's windows.
Thank you, Sandy. Every time I read that poem, it really resonates very strongly with me. It makes me want to cry. So thank you so much. And thanks to the Toronto Workmen's Circle Foundation and Arbiter Ring for keeping that dream alive. Now, Miri Koral is a native Yiddish speaker. She is the continuing lecturer in Yiddish at UCLA, where she's been teaching language, literature, and film for over 20 years. She's also the founding director and CEO of the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language, which offers active, high-quality, and comprehensive Yiddish cultural and education programming at yiddishinstitute.org. She teaches Yiddish at all levels online for the Workers' Circle and has translated from many print and online publications. Miri, among other things, is going to tell us today how this collection provides us with a snapshot of Jewish culture from Poland and she will also read us Miriam Ulanover's poem, Frontier, by the door. Over to you, Miri.
Thank you, David. So Shalom Aleichem from Venice, California. And first of all, I want to thank David Moskovitz for championing this new website and organizing this meaningful event and for inviting me to take part. I'm really deeply honored to be part of this event today with this distinguished panel for two reasons. One, the work, the creations presented on this website deserve to be widely known. And second, the skillful and painstaking translation work of Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz also deserves to be widely known. In my chosen, really second profession as an educator and promoter of Yiddish, I am, of course, often teaching about and presenting on the Holocaust. And I came early on to realize a particular truth. In addition, and perhaps sometimes instead of emphasizing the millions of lives lost, it is crucial, as Sarah said earlier, to also focus on the civilization, the way of life, the Nusach von Leben, as we say in Yiddish, that was also murdered virtually overnight. We have remnants of that civilization in works of literature, art, music, song, and the Song Remains website will help preserve some of these important remnants. And in my work, I've also always chosen to focus on the resistance to the Holocaust, not just the armed resistance, but especially the spiritual resistance, which was miraculously so widespread. These acts of courage and selflessness to preserve humanity and dignity in the ghettos and concentration camps occurred by way of soup kitchens, secret archives, preserving rare books and manuscripts, presenting plays, continuing to educate children, and of course, writing of poems, songs, plays in the heart of hell. I've used the earlier Ringelblum Archive website, for which Sarah did the translation, Poetry in Hell, in my teachings at UCLA, and Sarah herself has given talks on this subject for the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language. So I'd like to share with you a poem that is on the Poetry in Hell website, and perhaps will be part of this website as well. It's by Miriam Ulanover, mentioned earlier by Declan Dunn. And Ulanover was an established and beloved Yiddish poet based in Lodz, Poland, prior to the Nazi occupation. She was first interred in the Lodz ghetto, and then was killed at the age of 54 in Auschwitz, along with her daughter and granddaughter. Unfortunately, many of her works were lost, but the Oinik Shabbos heroes, the Ringelblum Archive of the Warsaw Ghetto, managed to preserve some of them. I love this short poem, which in my dialect is Meidl mit a Beigel, girl with a bagel, or Mädel mit a Bagel in standard Yiddish, which in a playful and charming fashion beautifully speaks to an enduring Jewish value of tzedakah, compassionate giving, even in hard times. I'll read Sarah's translation first so that you can more or less comprehend when I read the Yiddish after. In the Yiddish, you'll hear a bit of the Central Polish Yiddish dialect in the term of endearment, tochtershi, which needs two words in the English translation, darling daughter. And I'm going to attempt to read it as close as possible to my native Yiddish Polish dialect, though, of course, I've been teaching standard Yiddish for over 25 years. First in English. So this is Girl with a Bagel by Miriam Ulanova, translated by Sarah Moskovitz. The bagels that we baked together, each one, darling daughter, is made of 2 parts. First, we roll the tempting dough to make a twisted pole, then put the ends together, dear, to make a rounded hole. And with a warm and generous heart, give to the hungry poor. Remember what your Bubba taught. Don't take another's share. And soon enough, there came a test of hunger for the girl. Could she resist the tempting scent of warm and twisted dough? So here, she called, come and get it, the dough that smells so fine. And from the bagel that is last, give me the whole. That's mine. So in Yiddish, Meidl mit der Beigel. Die Beigelech, was du hast gebacken sei. Oi, jeder einer Tochterschi. Es hat Chalukim 2. Zum ersten geht der gedreiter Teig. Das Teig, was schmeckt mit noch. In später geht der Tochterschi dus keilichtige Loch. In Teilen soll's viel rachmen sich mit Hingerike, weil die Bobbe hat mit dir gelernt, verrat nicht jenems Teil. In Tekef, wie's wollt mit sich zerschmeichelt Krim in Tief, is angekimmen schnell genieg die Größe Hingerbrief. Nie, naht euch das gedreite Teil, das is was schmeckt wie noch. In mir, fin letzten Beigel, das keilig dicke Loch.
Thank you so much for that, Miri. Really appreciate your time here today and all of the work that you do teaching Yiddish. And it's lovely to hear your Central Polish accent as well. Now, our next speaker, Aaron Lansky, is one of the best-known figures in the Yiddish world. His organization, the Yiddish Book Center, has saved untold Yiddish books from being thrown away. And it's also the home to the world's largest Yiddish digital library. They run many education programs, events, and are out there every day helping to preserve the Yiddish language and culture. Aaron will tell us how this collection of mostly obscure poets in Yiddish and in translation contributes to the overall corpus of Yiddish literature.
Shalom Aleichem. My name's Aaron Lansky, and I am the founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. I would love to be there with you, Punim el Punim, speaking to you directly and in person. Unfortunately, I'm traveling today, so this iPhone recording is going to have to suffice. As you may know, I've spent the past 45 years of my life running an organization that has rescued well over 1 million Yiddish books. In more recent years, along with education and oral history, we've also begun an ambitious program to translate the best of Yiddish literature into English. In fact, we've now trained more than 120 translators, new Yiddish translators. But one of my favorites is still Sarah Moskovitz. Sarah's latest project, Das Lied ist geblieben, The Song Remains, was first published in the original Yiddish in Poland after the war. And as important as the book was, it had relatively small distribution in the original back then. So it's kind of vanishingly rare. But the content is really compelling, and perhaps even more so today than ever before. It's a collection of the work of Yiddish poets who were killed in the Holocaust. And Sarah has brought their work back to life, both in the original and in her own English translations. The collection includes works by Mordechai Gebirtik, who is a household name, at least in households like mine, but also writers, much lesser known Yiddish writers who are getting their due now, a bit belatedly, but it's really important that we can discover them. I think you'll agree with me as you begin to read these poems that they resonate more loudly today than ever before. I first met Sarah more than 25 years ago when she was working on her previous collection, Poetry in Hell, which was based on the documents discovered in the Oynik Shabbos archive that had been buried beneath the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto. At that time, I remember Sarah had trouble publishing the books. It was long before the Yiddish Book Center itself had started our own publishing house called White Goat Press, and there was little demand for, or at least the publishers thought there was little demand for Yiddish literature and translation. Sarah managed to bypass that problem, though, by making sure that the books were published online instead, which was great because it allowed them these poems to reach a much wider audience. I have a full disclosure to make before I go any further, though, and that is that I have a special connection to Sarah. She once wrote a poem about me, which at the time I found immensely embarrassing, but now I really treasure. So Sarah, thank you for that. Sarah herself, those of you who know her know, she's an absolute original with a PhD from Yeshiva University. She worked as both a kindergarten teacher and as a college professor. Did you know that she also had 25 grandchildren at her Pesach table? Or that she's almost a Landsman, a fellow countryman of mine. She was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, just 20 miles down the road from where I'm sitting right now. Hold on, one page to go. So, so far, I've only seen a few of the poems in her new collection. Like everyone else, I'm going to have to wait and read them on the installment plan as one poem a week goes live on the web. I think that little Nell will have nothing on Sarah, though, as we're all sitting here waiting for the next installment. So Sarah, I just want to say, in a mazel dikashor, I wish you all the best with your latest book. I'm confident it's going to strike a chord with both lovers of Yiddish and lovers of poetry all over the world. So Yasher Koyach, I congratulate you with all my heart.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Really appreciate that. And that poem about you is particularly nice too, and we'll try to find a way to publish that too. Now, our final speaker for today is Mark David, who is the voice behind the Yiddish Voice, or das Yiddische Kowal, a Yiddish language radio show, which you can listen to on WUNR in Boston on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Also streaming on the interwebs at the usual places, or as a podcast at yv.org. His program covers all aspects of Yiddish culture, and it is a simcha and a mechaya to hear an entire radio program in the Mamaloshen. And today, Mark is going to read a poem for us. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Dave. Very nice meeting you. Thank you for the honor of taking part here. I just want to plug my show for the coming week, if for no other reason than we had the pleasure to interview Traister Moskovitz at her home just a few days ago. So we'll be airing that interview in Yiddish coming Wednesday. YiddishVoice.com for information. I'm going to read Lodge by M. Goldstein, Moshe Goldstein. That's the pen name of Moshe Berschling. Lodge. Mein Freund, der verholmte Poet, ist berauscht von schierreuten Wein. Und verbänkter, verpflegt, spielt euch das Lied von Vergehen. Nur ich bin berauscht von der Gas, was singt also hell und zerglied. Mich lockt als der ewige Streit, was rangelt sich euch in mein Lied. Mein Freund, der verholmte Poet, tragt herbstigen Treue in sein Blick. Hat lieb in Dämmerung Schau, zu Holmen von ewigem Glück. Nur mich hat gefangen der Ruf von millioniger Herzen die Fried, hab in zersungener Stadt gefunden, war als Abasche. Lodge. My friend, the dreaming poet, is full of sunset wine. On his flute, he sadly plays the song of loss of better days and time. But I'm aroused by old street songs. They sing so brightly and so long, moved by the endless struggle that tends to happen in my songs. My friend, the dreaming poet, carries autumn's sorrow in view. He loves the twilight hour to dream happiness anew. But I am entranced by the call of millions who dream of having all, the joy of the city that sings and finds happiness within it springs. Translation by Sarah Traister Moskovitz.
Thank you so much for that, Meyer, and really look forward to hearing that interview of Yiddish on your program. And that is a beautiful poem about poets, right? It's very meta in a way. And that poem was so nice, you might like to read it again. And thanks to modern technology, you can do that right on our website, thesongremains.org. Now, several of our speakers have also mentioned another website, Poetry in Hell, which are the poems from the Oynik Shabbos Society's works in the Ringelblum archive. So the bagel that Miri read is available on that site as well. You might like to visit it, poetryinhell.org. So all of the poems read or performed today, we're hoping you'll subscribe to receive them, as well as a new poem every week for free from the site. Just go to thesongremains.org and click on the subscribe link at the top right of the page. Now, we've only heard from 7 poets in the collection today, and that means that there are another 29 poets that are waiting for you to discover them. Zichronam Livracha, may their memories be a blessing. As Bienenhaller says in his 1951 introduction to the printed book, which you'll also find on the site, with a sense of trembling and fear, everyone should take this book in hand and sing out these poems from previously silent lips. Only in this way will these poems live forever. So that about wraps up our program for today. But before we finish, I'd like to reiterate our call for help from people with Yiddish proofreading. If you're a Yiddish speaker, Yiddish reader, you might like to help out with that. And also recording readings of these poems in Yiddish and English. And again, if you're interested, please get in touch by going to the website and clicking on Contact Us. Finally, I'd like to thank all of our speakers, performers, and launch partners who made this event possible. Daniel Kahn, Dr. Sarah Traister Moskovitz, of course, His Excellency Ambassador Grzegorz Kowal and the Polish Embassy in Wellington, Leon Traister, Giacomo Lichtner, and Tehering Awaka, Victoria University of Wellington, Magda Brzezinska and Konrad Liasz, Declan Dunn and Remember.org, Gillian Wess, Sarah Williams, and the Holocaust Center in Zed, Sandy Feiner, Mel Cederbaum, and the Toronto Yiddish Workmens Circle Foundation, Cyril Trusser and the Committee for Yiddish, Miri Koral, the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language, and UCLA, Aaron Lansky and the Yiddish Book Center, Mark Meyer David and the Yiddish Voice, and of course, Catalyst Cloud, who are hosting our website. And I would also like to give a special thanks to our producer, Tereska Lepionka-Carroll, for doing such a wonderful job of organizing and managing the logistics for this launch. So, Yasha Koech, thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you on the songremains.org website. Sei gesund.